Welcome everyone to our breakout session number 2, Working Effectively with Faculty, moderated by Julia Nelsen. Julia is the program manager at the Institute of European Studies, where she works with faculty, students, and campus partners on a broad range of internationally focused initiatives. As a Cal alumna, she holds a PhD in comparative literature and taught on campus for several years before moving from academia to administration in 2018. She is also a co-organizer of this year's NOW conference. Julia?
Thanks so much, Kate. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session. I'm really excited to moderate this conversation with our great panel that we have assembled here today. Having worked as a faculty with faculty in many different capacities on campus, I'm really excited to moderate this conversation. So I'd like to take a minute to have our panelists introduce themselves, maybe starting with Jocelyn.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for participating in our session. My name is Jocelyn Surla Banaria, and I've been the Executive Director of the Berkeley Academic Senate for over a year now. Before this job, I was at the UC System Academic Senate for about 4 years as the Assistant Director. For those of you who don't know, the Academic Senate is part of the shared governance, where the Senate faculty work with the administration on policy and procedural decisions. There are about 20 committees, and I staff the leader, the chair and the vice chair, and some of the committees. And in my office, we have a staff of about 10 staff members. And I hope you enjoy our session today. Thank you.
Thanks. Eric?
Hey, how are you? Good to see, or good to sort of see everyone in the way that we can do these days. My name is Eric Falci. I'm a professor in the English department, and I'm also the associate dean in the graduate division. I've been at Berkeley since 2006 as a faculty member in the English department, and I mostly research and teach and write about poetry, especially modern and contemporary poetry, and particularly Irish and British literature. I've been the associate dean in the graduate division since 2017.
Thanks, Eric. Christian?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Gordon. For the last 4.5 years, I have served as the Assistant Dean of Development for the Division of Social Sciences, one of the largest academic units at UC Berkeley. This panel is extremely relevant and important to me, and I'm glad to be with you, and congratulations for selecting this. Our work with faculty is absolutely indispensable to achieving our goals. And we have one of the largest groups of faculty, over 275 in the division. That's about half the number of social scientists on campus. So we also have collaborations and partnerships across the university. And aligning with faculty against those goals is critical to what we do. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of those examples with you today.
Thanks, Christian. And Andrea, finally.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you all today, and so good to see so many familiar faces. My name is Andrea Lambert. I'm the Chief of Staff to the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost. I've worked on campus for about 12 years now in several different capacities. First, as the Director of Student Services in the Psychology Department, where I worked closely with faculty on curriculum planning and program planning, student advising, and department climate initiatives. In 2011, after about 3 years in psychology, I decided to join the Campus Shared Services Implementation Project, which was a big move for me. And in that capacity, I was able to work with faculty, mostly on building the organization and a lot of change management. And then I moved to the office of the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost about a little over 5 years ago. And in that capacity, I started working with faculty leaders, more academic leaders in particular, through Council of Deans, New Chairs Program, Faculty Leadership Academy. And it's just been a wonderful opportunity to get to know faculty from many different perspectives. And I look forward to sharing some more with you all about that.
Wonderful. So before we get started, I thought we could just get a sense of who's in the room with us, in addition to our panelists. So if you could take a minute, Kate's going to launch a poll. Which of the following of these options best describes your primary working relationship with faculty? just a couple minutes, see where all of you come from on campus. Looks like quite a mix of, quite a spread in all different fields, from research, administration, student services, academic departments, academic affairs, fundraising. So let's see. Great. So yeah, we have quite a spread and many different departments and sectors across campus. And I'm sure that in each of your departments, each of you has quite a different experience of working with faculty, even probably within the same department, depending on who you're working with. So to kick off the discussion, I just like to ask everyone in the room to take about 10 seconds to reflect and just drop in the chat one word that comes to mind when thinking about your experience of working with faculty on a day-to-day basis. Critical, eggshells, challenging, interesting, intimidating, chaotic, inspiring, challenging, fear, confusing. There's some great words, and 2 words, collaboration, power trip, yes, sometimes unpredictable. Yeah, so as we can see, and I'm sure there are many more words that will be dropped in the chat, working with faculty is a really exciting and rewarding part of being on campus. It's part of what makes higher education such a stimulating environment. It can also be challenging, a source of anxiety and frustration for some, sometimes both of those things at the same time. So I just thought to set the tone for today's conversation, some of the goals are not only to learn about some of the different ways that our panelists work with faculty across campus, but also to kind of come away with some best practices, some ideas for more productive and collaborative relationships with faculty, to sort of address what to expect in working with faculty members, to manage our expectations, also to overcome some challenges in working with perhaps difficult colleagues, difficult situations of conflict, and also maybe our own feelings of imposter syndrome or intimidation in working with faculty members. We have some of the most brilliant minds in the world working on the Berkeley campus, Nobel Prize winners, et cetera. And so just to get a sense of how best to negotiate those relationships and to collaborate with our faculty to make our mission and to achieve our mission of supporting critical education and research on the Berkeley campus. So I thought we could get started, since we have a faculty member joining us today, Eric, just to hear from your perspective, since your work involves both teaching and research in your home department of English, but also administration in the Dean's Office and the Graduate Division. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with staff across these different roles and sort of your primary tasks and responsibilities, how they're shared with staff? And also, what can staff expect in working with a faculty member like yourself who has sort of these dual duties in teaching and administration and research?
Sure. I'll say a few things, but then I don't want to talk for too long. I guess, God, there's so much to say about this. One thing that I wanted to kind of the 2 kind of things that I had to learn about the quickest, I guess, as in going and kind of starting, not only in starting the job, whenever that was, way back in 2006, but also when starting the associate dean job, is this is such a departmentally strong campus that we think in terms of campus departments and faculty members. I mean, I this is my first job out of grad school. I graduated and came here, and so I feel like Berkeley's kind of imprinted on me in that other way too. Like, this is like the way that Berkeley works is the way that things work, right? That's how I kind of felt like I kind of came into it. And it's very easy to think, it was very easy to think for a very long time that the way that things work in the English department is the way that things work everywhere, right? And so there's a kind of perspective shift that has to take place, and that's kind of hard to make, right? Like things that I thought were hard and fast campus rules were just, well, here's how the English department happens to do things. So part of the difficulty that I think was challenging as a faculty member, or just that I had to kind of continually work through at different levels, was this kind of this perspectival shift, right? That, the dean position that I am in now, or the associate dean position, is a 50% gig, and so I'm still kind of 50% in the English department. And so I'm always having to kind of go back and forth between these two different kind of tempos, these two different kind of modes of thinking, these two different kinds of relations between a faculty member, I'm a faculty member, a kind of rank and file faculty member in the department, and then this associate dean position. So that's one thing that's interesting and tricky, because we spend so much of our lives specializing in very particular kinds of things. Like I tell people, like I write books about contemporary Irish poetry. And they're like, really? Why did someone do that, right? And so we focus really particularly, but then we have to, and it's easy. It's too easy, I think, for faculty not to have to learn how the institution works. Or faculty can have careers in which they never have to think about how the institution works as an institution. And so that was a big learning curve, just learning how the institution works. And the other half of that is, when I came to the graduate division, I never really, it is an interesting position, because the academic leadership is kind of putatively in charge, is making decisions and overseeing this and that. But the career staff in the graduate division know infinitely more than I do or will about how not only graduate division runs, but about how Berkeley runs. But so there's a kind of weird balancing where you just have to kind of, I love the team. I love the staff in the department, but so that's one kind of relationship. But I love the team that I work with in the graduate division. I work mainly on student funding and some fellowships and things like that. So I work with the fellowship team a lot, and I just kind of think of us as kind of like working it out together. And the thing that's interesting to me is like solving I like the kind of analytical policy questions, like, oh wow, this is a weird ass policy. This is a weird policy this is a weird system-wide policy that we have to deal with. How can we make this work for us? And so I like some of those kind of analytical policy, how do we solve this problem in this really complicated environment? And so I've always seen it as a real kind of working together to figure stuff out in the conditions that we live in. So I can stop talking, but the two issues were like the kind of this perspectival shift that's always happening. And that can be really vertiginous and kind of disorienting for a faculty member to be like, I've been doing contemporary Irish poetry, and now I have to think about, the NSF fellowships that we get every year. And the other one is this kind of durational problem where many of the faculty leadership positions are short, right? The HGA is HGA for 3 years, the chair is chair for 3 years usually, but next to that you have staff members who have been in positions for much longer and actually have all the institutional knowledge, and so that's a really tricky balance to kind of keep going on with.
Yeah, so it sounds like staff can keep in mind, perhaps there's this balance, as you said, between unlearning. Faculty need to unlearn some of their departmental quirks and perspectives, but also they're learning as they go at the same time in whatever administrative role they find themselves, and having to kind of balance and change between those two perspectives. I think that's really helpful to hear. And perhaps I can follow up by asking Andrea, since she's worked, Andrea worked between, you've shifted from the Department of Psychology, so in an academic department, to Operational Excellence Initiative, and now you're in the Office of the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, as you said, working with academic leaders. Can you talk about your own process of sort of learning and unlearning and how those interactions with faculty have changed from a departmental kind of academic affairs perspective to more executive advising and leadership development? And what are some of the things you've learned along the way and some strategies in balancing those two things?
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia. As I mentioned earlier, I started my career on campus in the psych department as the director of student services. So I was working very directly with faculty members, kind of one-on-one in many cases, with their students, with programming, with curriculum planning. And so, I remember starting in that department. I'm guessing many of you have had this experience where I have a psychology background, so undergrad and grad degree in psychology. And here I was with these like very famous psychology professors. It was very daunting, but very exciting as well. I would say 99% of them were fabulous, and then there was the one or two that were just really difficult. And we all know those one or two, but they're fabulous in their own way. They're just challenging administratively sometimes. And I think, I learned there how to navigate the interpersonal communications, the quirks of particular faculty and what they needed and wanted, and how to schedule their classes and what GSIs they needed and that kind of thing. When I moved to operational excellence, which was a very unpopular program, for those of you who remember back in the day, I got to move from the kind of direct contact with faculty to, faculty who I didn't know, who I was trying to work with on building a project that they weren't in favor of for the most part. And it was a lot of change management. And so again, it was understanding where the faculty member was coming from, and how much information they knew and didn't know, because oftentimes the information they have administratively is filtered down to them in different ways. And sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not. One thing that I've really learned over the years is that, I think, and Eric was talking about this a bit, is that, while, I can't compete with their knowledge of their particular discipline and their, excellence in their field, I have a set of skills that they don't often have administratively, that they rely on me for to be successful in their work. And so, getting over my lack of confidence that I wasn't, kind of up to the job to be advising them in times, was really, it's taken a long time, and I still have self-doubt at times, but now I'm working with very high-level administrators, most of which are faculty administrators. So like Eric, they either have a 100% appointment or a 50% appointment or some variation of that. But almost all of them still have their research, and many of them still have their teaching. For example, the provost who I work for, has a full lab of 30 plus employees and students that he goes, that he works on daily. And I think it's really just important to remember that that faculty, I try to remember these are people too, right? Like just everybody that we work with. They're just different people with different skill sets and different expertise. I also, a couple things that I've learned is that faculty rhythms are very different from administrative rhythms, maybe a little less so in this environment where we're all working from home. But typically, the faculty rhythm is, they're working all the time. It's not an 8:30 to 5 o'clock job. So I've had to learn that, with Paul, the provost, if I want to get his attention, texting him at 6 a.m. is a good time. And so that's not true for everybody, but that's when he's up, and if I'm up and need to get something from him, that's a good time to get it. So learning about rhythms, also about communication, like their attention span is very short because they're juggling so many things. So how can I make sure that my ask is at the very top of the email? My deadline is at the top of the email. You've heard of this concept of BLUF, bottom line up front. This is like moving the most critical information for decision making to the top so that they don't have to read through your long email of explanations. And then I just want to also mention that faculty service roles, associate deans, et cetera, they're time limited, right? So if you have a really good one, value that. And if you have somebody that it's harder to work with, they will transition out of that role. But also, those roles are short, so their ability to learn them quickly is important. You know, they in many cases, they have to go back to the ranks of their faculty. You know, if they become chair, they have to go back and become a faculty member. So they, in many cases, they don't want to be heavy-handed about anything because these are their peers that they're going to have to work with for 30, 40 years. So those are just a couple things. I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thanks for those takeaways, Andrea, and also for just putting into perspective the importance of interpersonal communication and really sort of learning how to manage delicately, sometimes challenging relationships, and some strategies for doing that. Which brings me to Jocelyn. In the academic senate, I imagine that it's frequent that one encounters kind of situations of difficulty or resistance, and even stress as faculty kind of need to decide on really important complex policies and issues that affect the campus as a whole. So can you talk a little bit about your perspective within the Academic Senate as its sort of executive administrative director? What are some of the things that you've learned and some situations that you've encountered of that sort, and how have you dealt with them?
Thank you, Julia. First, I want to tell everyone, I went and graduated here at Cal with my undergrad, and never in my wildest dreams would I have thought to work with faculty, let alone faculty here at Cal. So to answer some of Julia's questions, some of the key challenges in my work with faculty in the Academic Senate is that the leadership and committee membership changes every 1 to 2 years, and they're all Senate faculty members. So I'm working with different individuals and personality styles every year. For example, one year when I was working at the system-wide Senate, I was working with a chair who was a great collaborator with the staff and senior administration. Then the next year, we had a chair who was very adamant in his way. One time I made a mistake with one of his letters that was going to the UC president. And from this chair, he came to my doorway and he was furious about how the letter came out. I remained calm and I told him that I was sorry and that I will reissue a revised correct letter right away. I did that, and I also contacted the president's staff about the revised letter coming. So in my role, it's not only working with the chair and faculty members, but knowing who around your work environment campus, fellow administrators that can help you succeed in your job. The best thing I could do is provide advice and consultation to the chair and the chairs of the committees that I staff. My style is that I'm a people person. I like to communicate with people and know what they're thinking. And I'm also a policy analyst. So my approach includes meeting frequently. Before COVID, this is in person. Now with COVID, scheduling Zoom meetings, meeting over the phone, and even through emails just to check in with them. And my style also includes providing background policy information where I can provide, that's the information I get to help provide advice and guidance. What has helped me understand faculty is knowing where they come from. For me, I completed a doctoral dissertation and I had to be an expert in my topic. Faculty, especially here at Cal, are experts in their field, as Andrea said. And this may come across to people as that faculty members are very confident and arrogant because they've been trained to be experts in their field and know their field so well. In the chat, some of you typed poor communication, confusing, and varied when working with faculty. Faculty are like different types of individuals, such as family members, coworkers, and working with students. I started my 28-year career in higher ed working with students and working with all types of different individuals. With a flexible personality and approach, one can work with various types of faculty members. So my last words to you for this portion is find your own style and how to deal with different and maybe difficult individuals and learn how to approach them. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much. And thanks for that tip, which I think bounces off of what Andrea and Eric were saying about given the high turnover rates in faculty administrative roles, it's important to really be nimble and kind of thinking about flexibility and just learning like who to ask for help, other fellow staff members, who to rely on to answer your questions, especially when the turnover and when your collaborations with faculty are so time limited. And I'm curious to hear from Christian, since you frequently, as you said, collaborate with faculty on fundraising projects, some of which might even take longer than the faculty administrative role of a year or two. You know, sometimes development takes a really long time, as we all know, and is quite different from academic affairs. So can you talk a little bit from your perspective about how you leverage your relationships with faculty to meet your goals and achieve your development targets, and just working on projects with faculty? What are some opportunities that you've encountered in addition to challenges?
Sure, thank you, and really enjoyed listening to the other panelist answers. There was some great advice in there, and I would like to touch on a point that was just raised before we start, and that is the words that our attendees submitted when they think of working with faculty. And I wanted to share, after 18 years of working with faculty in a very determined, focused way, I have felt all of those things at various times, and sometimes still do. And that's okay, that's normal. I would also suggest that most faculty members have felt most of those throughout their career. And remembering how Eric, as a great example, puts himself out there in front of his classes, in front of his colleagues as an administrator, when he publishes, when he writes. That's very intense. That takes a lot of guts and opens yourself up quite a bit. So let's remember that they're human beings. They feel these things too. And when that comes across to you, it's likely a result of these pressures. Understanding their role here at UC Berkeley is different. I worked for a number of private institutions before I came here, and the faculty member at UC Berkeley is different. There is more of an orientation towards service. I think a strong moral and ethical compass and a desire to put their talents to use for doing good and to be a part of this engine of social mobility. And that comes with pressures of its own, in addition to being at a place where you don't have the same resources that you do were you to go to an Ivy League peer institution. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind and remember that when you're dealing with them, and that those feelings are okay. I wanted to tell a quick story. There was a mention of a case study that I think illustrates the result of developing these relationships, and then answer a few quick points as to how we got there. I learned a lot about UC Berkeley and how to be effective at my job here from the dean that hired me, Carla Hesse, who's now back on the faculty in the Department of History, and Professor Shakar Kareev in the economics department. And he was the department chair when I started. Faculty in their nature are teachers, and you will learn from them, and you should embrace that opportunity and remember that you don't need to know everything that they need to know. You need to be respectful. You need, when you're working with, in this case, the chair of economics, I had to know about his work, the department, the situation they were in. And over time, we developed trust and a strong working relationship. And they really inspire me. And I draw a lot of motivation from wanting to help them succeed because I understand how important their jobs are. And to illustrate that, Shakar and I were in New York City about 1.5 years ago, and we were hosting a dinner for maybe 15 of our biggest donors and prospective donors in New York City. These are presidents of companies, a billionaire you've seen on TV, lead policymakers in our country. One of those moments during the opening minutes where you say to yourself, what the hell am I doing here? I'm so lucky to be in this room. And I felt all those things that you mentioned at the beginning. And as we went on through the evening, a relatively new donor asked Shakar why he stayed at Berkeley after he had told a story of being offered a $20 million endowment, name your price, at one of the top European schools. And without hesitating, he shot back, he stays because of his colleagues and his students. And he told a story of a graduate in the PhD program in econ. He was an immigrant. His father drove a UPS truck. His mother worked in a laundromat. He graduated with his PhD in economics, and he came by to thank Shakar for his help. And standing behind him down the hall were all the members of his family that wanted to say thank you for what you've done. And that is, for Shakar to draw that type of inspiration really motivates me and why we have to win. So we built a very strong relationship. And I think the way that we did it is from my understanding of the pressure that he's under. I don't assume that he knows what I know. What we're going through right now, as was mentioned earlier, faculty lives all the time. They're remote, they're doing research, they're traveling, they're speaking, they're teaching, they're writing at all hours. They don't have a set schedule. And when I ask for their time, their most valuable resource, I have to be very diligent in explaining why, what's the desired outcome, what is your role. I don't assume that they know these things because where they invest their time is extremely important to them. And I have a responsibility to make sure that that's used to the utmost effect. Once we recognize that, then I'm able to put them in a position to be successful, and they're going to want to work with me more, and we build from there. But understanding what that return is and what their role is, and also not assuming that they understand just even the basic aspects of what we do. It took a year for some of the relationships I had with faculty for me to understand I had to get across what it really was that they were doing with us, and that they weren't going to be put in a room with a bright light with a donor and try to force money out of them. They need to talk about their work. They exemplify what we do here, why UC Berkeley is so important to do the research that we do and teach the people who we teach at the scale and level that we teach it at. So once we develop that alignment and shared understanding around our objectives of goal and what their role is in discussing their research, their work, they personify it. Then it becomes actually enjoyable, and we can move forward together. But don't assume, don't make assumptions, and be respectful of their demands, what they're put under, and the fact that I've never worked with a faculty member at UC Berkeley that has only one job. And Eric's a perfect example. 2 titles. If I looked on his faculty page, there'd be 3 other things there that he's involved in, and we have to respect and appreciate that.
Thanks so much. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, is the fact that we can all rally around sort of this shared mission that we have on the campus to support teaching and research. As you mentioned, Christian, Berkeley faculty are quite mission driven and quite stimulated by those ethical questions and who they're supporting in a public education space through teaching and research. And so building partnerships around that through really strong communication, I think is a good takeaway for our audience today. And I understand also this is sort of a question for the whole panel before we open it up to the audience. A lot of those collaborations are changing now, right? Since we're in a Zoom world and we are living in a very challenging time, both on our campus and in higher education as a whole. In this field that we work in. So how do you see your collaborations and your partnerships with faculty changing as a result of this crisis, of the pandemic, and just, not because we're all working from home, but because higher education is really feeling the hit from the crisis? Do you have any sense of how staff and faculty relationships might change or might evolve in response to some of these changes? And this is a question for any one of you who would like to.
I'll say quickly, I think it's not just with faculty, certainly there, but one of the results of this new environment, I think, is a higher level of empathy. that we understand what everyone is going through and the demands, because now our personal and our professional lives have in many ways become mashed together. And what we saw on this panel, somebody's cat jumped on their keyboard and ran a string of slashes through the chat. I've had meetings end because a kid ran in and hit the button. These things happen, and I think we're developing a greater tolerance for the humanity that we all have and what we're all dealing with. And I think that has certainly been true of faculty as well. And I think that makes a more empathetic and understanding relationship going forward, and I think strengthens it. That's an opportunity in this current situation.
Yeah, I would echo what Christian's saying. I think it's been definitely an equalizer to be on Zoom, whether it's just the positioning in the room, which there's a lot of posturing and positioning, especially as you get higher in the organization. Amy Scharf has a really great question in the chat as well, which is kind of related, I think, in terms of how do we build the same kind of collaborative partnerships we do potentially with staff or students. And I've found that over the last few months, those my partnerships have been more partnerships, right? Like we are working together to figure things out in ways that we hadn't before, where it was much more faculty, administrator, and staff. I think as Christian was mentioning, having your family in the background. I have a 15-month-old that sometimes is in my Zoom calls, and I think sometimes other people's kids walk through their Zoom calls, and it's coming back to that we're all humans and we're all part of humanity, and there's and we're all, suffering in different ways, in the pandemic, some greater than others. And I think that allows for greater collaboration when we can actually work with the people and not just the title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that connects, I guess that's a good time to transition to a couple of great questions that I've gotten from the audience. One is how do, especially in this new environment, or perhaps related to because of this new environment, how would you recommend building trust and mutual respect quickly when interpersonal and in-person interactions are not possible? And related to that, getting back to the point earlier about, we are all dealing with fellow human beings, right? Like professors are people just like the rest of us, and everybody has their own quirks and challenging traits and their personalities and things to balance. So if we're in light of that, why is there this attitude of deference and reverence towards faculty members, and how does that sort of bounce off of the trust and the mutual respect that we're meant to be building in our work on campus? Open to anyone. Perhaps, yeah, Eric, I was going to say, perhaps you have some insight.
I wanted to hear what Eric has to say.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of things going through my head, so I'll try to be clear-ish, sort of clear. I think, I think one part of the answer goes back to the kind of the question about kind of how to build trust or build a relationship quickly in this weird environment. There's sort of two problems, right? There's two factors that I wanted to mention. One, I think, and it goes back to what Julie was saying, and many other people were saying as well, about the kind of shared principles about why we're here, right? In the same way that the economics professor sitting with the billionaires said, gave that story about, why did you leave $20 million on the table from, I don't know, let's say Harvard, to stay at Berkeley, and gave her, the staff members, every staff member that I've encountered and worked with at Berkeley, I'm sure has had similar analogous offers, right, to do something else in a different kind of professional world, in a different kind of industry, and has made the choice to stay at Berkeley, or to stay in higher education. And so I think part of it is that not only the shared principles of kind of the importance of Berkeley as an institution, the importance of the kind of institution that Berkeley is, but also the kind of shared intellectual work that we do, right? And I think it's focusing on those kinds of intellectual, I think what Andrea was saying, kind of like, how do we figure this out? Like, bureaucracy isn't just dumb. I mean, and dumb by which I mean, it's not like there's no thought behind it. Like, people came up with policies in whatever year to try to solve certain kinds of problems. They might not work now, they might work now, but like, let's think through the intellectual problems that we're kind of working on together. And that's been one of the really rewarding and just wonderful things about working with staff members in graduate division and in the department, just sort of, the shared intellectual project of making the institution go, right? And not just kind of bureaucratically doing so, but like, there's lots, I mean, the complexity of bureaucracy is, I mean, it's intensely analytical. I mean, the kind of work that is needed to keep this place going is so intense and so multifaceted. And so I think sharing things, like building relationships, or not relationships, but building kind of, maybe trust was the word I think that was used. On that level, it could be really valuable, because it's about a shared intellectual. Why are we doing this particular thing that we're doing? We want to solve this kind of problem in this unbelievably difficult, uncertain environment. And we have resource issues and every other issues. And, so the shared intellectual work of kind of how can we figure this out together? That's been really rewarding. And that's also the thing that's hardest to do, because I found that the trickiest part, I mean, there was one, so Lisa Garcia Bedoya is obviously the dean and the vice provost of the graduate division. And there was one week that went by where I didn't have a Zoom meeting with her at all. Just like at all. Like, I didn't see her for maybe she had a few days of Kate, so I didn't see her for 10 days. And I started holy do I still have a job? Like, do I still work here? And so the kind of alienating effect of Zoom is really real. And because you never get any of the ambient, you don't run into people in the hallways. And I have some of my most interesting conversations with, members of the team in graduate division in the hallway, or going from one meeting to another. And those are rich spots for work. And part of the difficulty, or part of the challenge, is remaking those spontaneous moments in the very unspontaneous world that we live in now. And I think that's the thing that really takes some work, trying to make spaces for that to happen.
Thanks. Any other
I
comments on that? Go ahead, Jocelyn. Yeah.
Okay. There's like Eric, there's a lot of ideas and a lot of questions. I wanted to speak on how to build trust, as well as Cassandra's question on faculty often forget to listen to staff professionals, and Amy's point about managing up assumption. As I said, find your style. I'm a collaborator and I like to communicate. One thing I started doing in my previous position is to meet with each committee chair before their term, and they found it surprising, but people like to talk. So I entered the meeting, what are your priorities for the year? And so then I'm thinking, as staff, okay, these are your priorities. Well, as staff, we can help you get to your priorities. So trying to find that link of finding the faculty success for their projects and how the staff can play a role. In the past, academic senate staff has been seen as note takers or administrative support. And I wanted to shift to more of Andrea's role, chief of staff. We are the experts to help you to provide success in your role. And so once they see that connection, I think then they build trust with the staff. Yes, they do come into the administrative roles they're experts and they feel I could do this, but then they don't know how to do it administratively, or they don't know the correct the offices to get support from. So trying to help them create that link. I think so my style is always creating relationships or a connection, or even if it's a more casual meeting, so that they can see us as humans versus we are just the support staff.
That's a great point. And thinking of ourselves as sort of facilitators and bridge builders in a way between staff, or between what can sort of really be executed administratively and in terms of, how the campus works, but reconciling that and matching that up with what are the goals and priorities, and how can, we can sort of turn these maybe grand, sometimes pie in the sky ideas that faculty might have into real, actionable items. And real concrete results on the campus.
Yes.
I had a question for Andrea, just thinking about the Faculty Leadership Academy, which is a really unique program on the campus, and the new chairs program, but particularly, Eric brought up some good points about, how faculty need to learn things and really understand where staff are coming from and vice versa. So can you just share a little bit for those in the audience who aren't familiar with the Faculty Leadership Academy, how your work supports that process?
Yeah, so the Faculty Leadership Academy, we've had one cohort of, I think there were 19 faculty go through it last spring. We were supposed to have another one in fall of 2020, but we pushed it out to spring 2021. Again, another cohort of 20, faculty who are kind of emerging leaders. Some have already been chairs, associate deans, some are, directors of ORUs, et cetera. And I think, that program is really intended for leadership skill, leadership capacity and leadership skills. It's not a management course. It's not like how to. Mm-hmm. It is really developing the capacity through a cohort model, conflict management, negotiating, learning about how you impact others. So, we're really talking about transformative learning, and it's about their experience and learning through the experience. So I think, one thing I've learned about faculty, especially our faculty leaders, is they like to learn from each other. So mm-hmm. anytime that I have the opportunity to, do a program or a training, they don't like trainings typically. So we don't call them trainings, we call them sessions or opportunities or whatever. And we really, we give them information, but we also try to create an opportunity for them to learn from each other, because many of them have had experiences that they could educate each other with or share, and that really works well with faculty to create an environment where they can learn from each other and have subject matter experts in the room to make sure that they're not teaching each other the wrong information. Mm-hmm. But Eric's laughing over that. I think it's true, right? They're great learners, but you need to approach it in a way that they're going to hear the information.
Thanks. And I think this was brought up before, but there was a question about how staff are sometimes not invited to really play an active role in some of the partnership building and real priority setting, goal setting on the campus that faculty might build with each other. So do you envision ways to shift this, or ways that faculty might be sort of invited to the table, I guess you could call it, in some of these decision-making processes?
I think with that question and the one before it, and thank you to the people who put that forward, because the power differential, as it was described, is a real thing. And the professional life of faculty is essentially organized in a hierarchy of rank as you elevate in your career, and those differentiations and that hierarchy is very important, and it's very important to respect that. And I think the key is building that trust and respect, and not trying to do too much. If I'm working with Eric on fundraising, it's not my job to be an expert on Irish poetry and tell him what his next book should be on. I'm the expert on making a case for support for his work and why somebody should invest in that, why it's important. And if I remember my role and I kind of say to myself on a regular basis, stay in your lane, we don't want the tail wagging the dog, then I think faculty will respect that, and it will take time to earn that trust to pick those moments when you can push back on something, or as somebody referenced it in the question, to manage up in a way. And I think you should also remember that you're not going to have that situation with every faculty member that you work with. There are probably a handful where it's really critical that you have that level of trust. For me, that's the dean, our department chairs, and then the faculty that are involved in our development effort in various ways. And I build trust with them by being brutally honest, not over-promising, not painting too rosy of a picture or what I can deliver, being accountable, mentioning, Jocelyn mentioned owning a mistake with a faculty member. That is extraordinarily difficult and challenging, but extremely important. They will respect that. So who are the key people that you do need to build that relationship that you could focus on? And I remember often there was a story I heard a donor tell once. Korean Airlines had the worst safety record in all of commercial aviation. And they realized through some of the accidents they were having, it was because the cultural hierarchy did not allow the co-pilot to give direction to the pilot. And there was an instance actually where a co-pilot was desperately trying to tell the pilot they were too low, and he got smacked in the face by the pilot in the cockpit, and the plane crashed. And they hired a consultant to come in and fix that problem. Now they have one of the best safety records in commercial aviation. And so, but that was a concerted effort. They had to figure out how to do it in their own context, and we have to do that as well. What are the key relationships? How do you build trust based on what you do, not what they do, and develop respect based on that?
That's really insightful. And I also see in the chat perhaps some pushback also, just in thinking about some folks mentioned that faculty sometimes, as much as we want to be building partnerships and trust and collaboration, sometimes faculty might assume that what staff do is not considered expertise, or that it has more of this, I guess, support administrative role, as Jocelyn was mentioning, and that when things don't go this ideal way, and to achieve some of the goals that are laid out, faculty take out their frustrations on these sort of like messengers, or management procedures and policies at the administrative level, rather than kind of advocating for bigger changes. So I wonder if
you have to have
Eric,
thick skin.
Of course, yes.
And word will spread. When you find those key relationships and develop, trust, alignment, and mutual respect, based on what you bring to the table, they will tell their colleagues that will branch out.
Go ahead.
I want to reiterate what Christian was saying. I think, reputation as a staff member is really important. Faculty talk. They know who the good administrators are. They know who the people who can help them are. And if you focus your attention on the faculty or the people that you can work well with, and really build that trust and build the notion that you are a trustworthy administrator that can come through for them, that has good insights, that has productivity, that has follow through, that's responsive. I have to tell myself at times, don't spend emotional energy on those faculty or those faculty administrators who don't appreciate you, or who are always complaining. I mean, be responsive, respond to them, but don't spend emotional energy being upset about what they're complaining about, or, fighting against them, because there's so many other things you can focus your attention on. And I mean, easier said than done. So don't get me wrong. I do get frustrated, and sometimes, just this week I was like, but, I had to rewrite an email several times to respond to a faculty member, so that I wasn't, a high level faculty member so that I wasn't being reactive. But, that's going to speak for itself in the future.
Yeah, and I guess it's helpful to keep in mind really investing your time and your resources and your energy into relationships that you feel will yield productive and positive results. So sort of find your allies, I guess, in the faculty community. That sounds like a great takeaway. And I see we only have a couple minutes left in the session. So unless there are other questions from the audience, maybe we could just wrap up by, perhaps we started with asking the audience, like, what's one word that characterizes your relationships with faculty? What's one word for each of you, just in closing, that you would offer as a takeaway for our audience today in building effective relationships with faculty?
For me, it's, and I've said it before, flexibility.
Great. Eric?
Yeah. I mean, flexibility is important. And just this.
Doesn't have to be one word, it could be a few words.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like the notion of a shared mission or a shared project or shared intellectual issues that we're dealing with is really important to me, because then we're thinking, staff, administrator, faculty, blah, 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 we're all thinking about ways using the various expertises that we have to make things better in the way that we're trying to make things better. So like that kind of sense of a shared project has been really, I didn't go, it's funny, like one thing, I don't really think of myself as like, I'm in the industry of higher education. I work on poetry and stuff. And so like, I never, so that took a long time for me to kind of get to the point where like, oh yeah, okay, I guess I am in this sector of higher education. And so that like coming to understand the shared project or the kind of shared work that we do has been important. Sorry, that was way more than one word.
That's great, thank you. Andrea and Christian, just quick 1 minute left.
Yeah, I mean, I think patience and keeping an open mind, right? Like trying not to judge them based on a first interaction, but continuing to question your own assumptions and your willingness to look at your own limitations.
Great.
I would say essential. It's absolutely essential. And as Julia mentioned earlier, the word facilitator, that is my primary job description. It's about facilitating connection to the faculty and the institution, almost minimizing my own role. And as it's essential, whatever obstacles and hurdles come up, I have to find a way through, because there's no way to do what we do without productive partnerships with faculty. They are the institution. They bridge generations of students. They form the impression that our alumni have of the institution based on their experience here. They are what we do in partnership with our students. So I just have to find a way.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly share as the session is wrapping up, and I guess Kate will transition us to our lunch break and our next session. But I also wanted to direct you all to, on the Now Conference virtual venue, we've posted a handout with some 10 tips and suggestions, sort of drawing on this conversation from our really great collaborators and contributors from across campus. We've crowdsourced some tips and strategies from our colleagues, so we thank them. And I want to thank again our panel for their wonderful insights today. So feel free to email me or any of our panelists. We're happy to continue the conversation. So I'll turn it back over to Kate. Thank you again.
Thank you, Julia and panelists, for a great presentation, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. Just to note, I did add that handout, a link to that handout in the chat as well. We appreciate everyone's time and participation. Thanks a lot, everyone.